Hey guys, it's Hexical here, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to mod your RK61 so that it looks and sounds a lot better. Before we start, you're going to want to make sure you have these things. You're going to want switches to put into the PCB, some Krytox lube, some stabilizers, keycaps if you want some new keycaps, and then that's all you need. Now that you know that you have everything, let's go ahead and open up the package and see what we're working with. The first thing you're going to see when you open up the box is the keyboard itself wrapped in some cardboard. It's also going to have a plastic covering on it. Hidden underneath the keyboard, you're going to find a manual and a thank you note and just some other random papers. And then beneath the cardboard, you're going to find a USB-C cable, a keycap puller, and some extra switches and a switch puller. Now that we have it all unboxed, let's talk about the keyboard a little bit. The RK61 is a $50 hot swappable keyboard. Hot swappable means that you can take the switches out and there's no soldering required. I ended up going with the blue switches, but you can get brown or red, but it doesn't matter, especially if you're planning on switching them out. The PCB itself is 5-pin hot swap, but there's also 3-pin hot swap PCBs. It also features a USB-C connection and RGB. Now that we have the general overview done, let's talk about the stabilizers, the first part of our mod. The stabilizers are the things that help your big keys stabilize themselves, and you'll find them right here. Usually your backspace, enter, shift, spacebar, and left shift key are the ones that have the stabilizers on them. These are the first things we're going to be replacing because of the noise that they make. It's really unpleasant, as you can see right here. And that's where these are going to come in. These are Durox stabilizers. The material is a lot better and they're just higher quality. So let's start the process of disassembling the stabs and lubing up these ones. To start the disassembly of the stabilizers, first you're going to have to remove the switch. To remove the switch, all that you have to do is squeeze on the top and bottom of the housing and then pull up with a special tool. Then the switch should just come out really easily. Next, you're going to want to look for the two little tabs that are on the stabilizers themselves. These hold the stabilizers into your plate, and once you push them in, they should pop up. You're going to want to push them in and then pull up just a little bit. You're not going to want to use too much force, but you can use a little. Don't be scared to pull up a little bit. I recommend using a thing like a flathead screwdriver like I am here, because it gives you a good amount of leverage to get them out. Once you have them popped out, all that you have to do is pull up on them and then the stabilizer should be out and you're all good to go. Now you just need to repeat this for all the switches that have stabilizers in them. Just take your time and make sure to be gentle and you won't hurt anything. Now that you have everything disassembled, it's time to grab your stabilizers and your lube that I mentioned earlier. When you get your stabilizers, they don't come assembled. You're going to have your housings, and then you're going to have your inserts, which go inside the housings. And then finally, you have the wire, which holds everything together. Now we're going to talk about the lubricant. You're going to want the Krytox 205G, and you're also going to want a thin paintbrush like this. Now that we have everything ready to go, it's time to start lubing our stabilizers. Right now, I'm going to start out with the housings. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you put some lube on the cap or somewhere else where you can lightly coat it. You're not going to want to glob it onto the brush. And then you're going to take your brush and lightly and evenly coat all the inside parts of the housing. You want to make sure it's as even as you can get it, and you also want to make sure that you don't put too much in it. If you put too much into the housing, you're going to end up with really mushy stabilizers and your keys won't work right. Once that's all done, it's time to assemble this. You're going to want to take an insert and look for the side that has the holes. One side's going to have one hole and the other side's going to have two holes. Once you find the side that has two holes, you're going to want to take that insert and look on the housing and find the side that clips into a wire. That's the side where the two-hole side goes into. And then you can just take the insert and clip it in, and then that's how you lube and assemble these parts. The next part we're going to be lubing is the wire of the stabilizer. Now, instead of doing light coats like we did with the housing, you're going to actually want to glob it on this time. Even though you're globbing it on, you're still going to want to make sure that you're trying to get as even a coat as possible. And you're also going to want to make sure that you're not just getting the end of the wire, you're going to want to go around the bend a little bit. Some people just take the wire and stick it in their lube and call it a good day, and that works perfectly fine too if you want to do it that way. The most important thing is that you have a nice thick covering on the wire. And of course, once you're done with that side, you're also going to want to do the other side, and you're going to want to make sure both those coats are even also. Once you're finally done, it's time to assemble your stabilizers. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your wire and push it into the housing and look for the bottom hole and the two holes. And then you're just going to want to press down and listen for a snap. Then you just have to go to the other side, grab your other housing, and do the same thing. And then once that's all done, you've completed and lubed your first stabilizer. Now that you know how to lube a stabilizer, you can go ahead and complete all the other ones like I'm doing in this time lapse here. My best advice to give you is to be slow and be thorough with all the lubing that you do. Make sure everything's evenly coated like I mentioned, because your goal is to just make sure everything is nice and smooth. Another thing to note is don't be scared to get lube on your hands. It's gonna happen, especially with the small stabilizers. I recommend just keeping something that you can wipe your hands down with every once in a while. Next up, we're going to be installing the stabilizers. What you're going to want to do is make sure that the side that has the wire is facing toward the little notches on the plate. And then you just want to slide those housings in there and then push down, and they should click in. You'll also notice that there are band-aids on mine, but I actually had to remove them because they didn't work out, so don't mind those. You're just going to want to repeat this process throughout the entire keyboard and make sure you hear a click on each of the stabilizers. If they're not mounted properly, they're not going to click properly and things won't feel right on your keyboard. Once you're all done, you're finally done with the stabilizers. Now let's do a little sound test. Now that our stabs are sounding nice and sweet, we can move on to our switches. Like I said earlier, this came with the blue switches, but we're going to be replacing these, especially because the sound is just not nice at all. On top of that, these switches are just really scratchy sounding and they feel scratchy. That's why we're going to be replacing them with these Akko Rose Red switches. These are a really nice budget linear switch with 43 grams of operating force. Not only do they look really nice, but they sound amazing too. The first thing we're going to be doing with these is lubing them up. The point of lubing up these switches is to make the sound just a little less pingier and also smoothen out the travel of the switch. You're going to need a switch opener to actually get the switch open too, which I have right here that I 3D printed. All that you have to do is take the switch and make sure it's facing the correct side and then push down, and then it should all pop open. This will reveal everything inside of the switch, and also you'll have the top housing removed. The important parts you want to remember are the stem, the spring itself right here, and then of course the bottom housing that's still in the switch opener. The first thing we're going to be lubing today is the bottom housing. Just grab your brush and lightly coat it, and then go ahead and start lightly coating the sides where the stem and the spring contact the bottom housing. You're going to want to make sure that you're not globbing it on like the housing with your stabilizers. You just want a light, even coat on all sides. You're going to want to make sure that you get the inside hole too. Next up, we're going to be lubing the stem of the switch. Just like before, you're going to want to get some lube on your brush and then lightly coat all four sides of the stem that contact the housing. You're going to want to make sure it is a nice light coating, because if you put too much, then your keys are going to be way too mushy and you're not going to like that feeling either. You're also going to want to lube up that little prong that's sticking out of the bottom of the stem. The last part of the switch we're going to be lubing is the spring. Normally people would just take the springs, throw them in a bag, and then throw some liquid lube in a bag and shake them around, but unfortunately I don't have that. So I'm just going to be lubing the ends with my Krytox. Both of these methods work perfectly fine, but this one just takes a little bit longer. You're going to make sure that you're doing light coats on this spring too. You don't want too much lube on these either. Now that everything's lubed up, we can finally assemble the switch. The first thing you're going to want to grab is your spring. This just sits on the little bump inside the bottom housing. The next part is the stem. Now on your stem, you're going to notice that one side has prongs that are sticking out a little further than the other side. That side is the side that's going to go toward the gold metal plating in your switch. Then you're just going to want to hold everything down and make sure your top housing's facing the correct way, and then push down. You should hear a nice click. That means everything's nice and secure and it all worked. And that means you finally lubed and assembled your first switch. Now you just have to do it for the rest of the keyboard. Here you can hear the difference, with W being lubed and 1 not being lubed. There's a lot more springiness and scratchiness in the unlubed switch. I will admit this process is the longest in the build, but it is way worth it. These are all my lubed switches right here. Now that everything's lubed and assembled, it's time to actually put the switches into the keyboard. You're going to notice that this switch has 3 prongs on it, 2 metal ones and a plastic one. This is going to correspond on the keyboard, where you see a big hole and then 2 little holes. All that you need to install it is to push the switch into the PCB where the holes are, and then you should hear click. Make sure not to use too much force, just push lightly. Now you just have to repeat this process for every switch in the board. Keep in mind that you might bend some switches when you're doing this, and that's perfectly fine. All that you have to do to fix it is look at the switch and then pull it back and straighten it out as much as possible. The important thing is not to use too much force. You can break the PCB if you push it in too hard and it's not going in right, and that is a lot harder to fix. Generally though, this process is really simple and there's not much to break. Now it's time to talk about keycaps. The keycaps I'm using are the Childhood Die Sub Cherry Profile keycaps from KBD Fans. They're a nice pink and blue profile that I think will fit really nice with my setup. The legends on the front are really clear, and on top of that they feel nice and sturdy. So let's go ahead and throw these on our keyboard. Installing keycaps is really easy. All that you have to do is find the stem insert on the keycap and then insert that onto the stem on the switch. And then you just have to repeat the process for all the other switches. Unfortunately, I didn't get a time-lapse footage of me putting on the keycaps, but this is what it looks like with the keycaps on, and I'm really happy with it. So now let's get into a sound test and just talk about it a little bit. And that is pretty much how to completely mod out your RK61 and make it a really nice mechanical keyboard. I only spent $29 in total for the Durock plate stabilizers and the Aqua Rose red switches, which is a really great deal. And the keycaps are completely optional, but I did spend $55 on those too. So I spent around $80 to make this keyboard look and feel amazing, which I think is a killer deal, especially in the mechanical keyboard market. If this video helped you out, make sure to leave a like, and if you like this type of content, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching. See ya.